following discussion is not necessarily the views of all involved. The goal is to start open and honest discussion in the Christian worldview. Like all things, weigh what you hear with what you know and join us in our pursuit for the truth. Enjoy the podcast.
Just like, hey, remember Abraham? They're like, it can't be Abraham, there's no camels.
I want to buy it. And they're like, no, we want to give it to you. No, I want to buy it. Well, then maybe do. It's like two Mennonites arguing.
Anyways, there's a cool thing with Azazel in there, but that's not really it.
No.
This isn't about demons, this is something else.
How very Catholic of you. And that's a dope story.
Man, this went nowhere.
All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the podcast, Second Rate Saints podcast, that is. I'm Caleb. To my left is...
I'm Joel. And to my left is...
I'm Colton. And to my left...
I'm Joshua. To my left is...
Back to Caleb. Joel.
Yeah, before we start off, I just want to plug our social medias, as we've been a little more active online. We're on Instagram at Second Rate Saints. We got a website, www.secondраtesaints.com, where you can find the links to everything we're doing, book reviews, blog posts, podcasts, shorts, anything. You can all find it on there. So just check us out on there. But to start off with our first segment, Caleb, what have you been reading?
I read a book called Understanding Biblical Theology, a comparison of theory and practice by Edward Klink III and Darian Lockett. They're both
cool.
Yeah. They're both Biola professors, Biola University, that is. It's fascinating, actually. Like, if you're interested in what the difference between biblical theology and systematic theology, and why there's such a variety of approaches in biblical theology, and where the field is at its current moment in, I think it was written in like 2016 or something, but it's still very contemporary.
It moves about as fast as that with biblical theology. It's not a lot of changes.
Well, yeah,
okay.
Yeah. It definitely got changed a lot in the 50s and 60s, that's for sure. Very different now. It goes over 5 different approaches, starting from like an emphasis on history and then moving towards like more gradient kind of progression towards an emphasis on theological reading. So historical reading on one end, theological reading on the other.
Just and then as a reminder, what does he say biblical theology is?
I mean, it's a gradient.
A spectrum.
I've also read some of this book, so I'm not just butting in. I do actually know about the book.
Everyone just seems to have a different opinion.
Yeah, well, that's kind of his whole point. Sorry.
It's okay. In layman's terms, as simple as I can, and this isn't true in like hyper specifics, but generally speaking, biblical theology is what is the theology the Bible is explicitly trying to say. Systematic theology would be what does the church believe?
Okay.
Constructive theology would then be like it's like systematics but on steroids. But whatever, that's a new development and nobody cares.
And then you have historical theology. What has the church believed over time and how it's developed?
Yeah. Biblical theology is, that's very centered on the text. Specifically, what is that text explicitly saying? And he goes over the approach of several like big names, James Barr, D.A. Carson, N.T. Wright, Bevard Childs, and Francis Watson. For me, the two that I liked were N.T. Wright and D.A. Carson. But yeah, it's a great book. I'd highly recommend it. I have a review already up on the book review section. It's just under 200 pages. It is a little technical.
What were the 5 perspectives? Like
their names?
Yeah.
Historical description, which is full buy-in to like the historical grammatical method of reading scripture, that hermeneutic. Almost to the degree of like you can't extract different, like a cohesive theology across multiple things.
You can't even mix them, kind of thing. Is that this
not
one?
Just not mix them. You can't create a linear progression of thought.
Well, each individual book has its own story. Don't mix it, or not even don't mix it. Don't compare it to other ones.
Basically, in comparison, you will lose the individuality of each.
Okay.
D.A. Carson, which would be History of Redemption, which is extremely popular, especially in North America.
Yep.
In North American schools, is more like this is their snapshots of God's process of history, redemptive history throughout time, and they're snapshots of our progressive knowledge progressive revelation of God and where they're at, and they're moving forward. N.T. Wright's very similar. These guys call his whole thing worldview story because it's like, it's a thing. He deals hard with narratives, and it's kind of like the Bible presents the grand meta-narrative, still very biblical. Not biblical, still very historical. His is the middle point. It is very historical because those people articulated that grand story in the present moment. But contemporary readers are invited to read that grand story and what is their place in it now that it's progressed to where it is now, and how do I operate with it? You know, canonical approach is very. It's hard to actually rationalize that one. It kind of goes that it leans heavy on divine authorship of everything, and therefore it matters less what the individual human author was saying in those times, and it's more that God knew what the final canon form was going to be.
How God guided how it's written, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. But God created it as an interconnected document, and He knew what was coming ahead. Therefore, He prepped before.
Okay.
So does that give the reader the ability of reading the New Testament into the Old Testament?
Yeah.
Rather than just seeing the Old Testament as a foreshadowing of what would come?
Foreshadowing would be more heavily like History of Redemption and N.T. Wright's worldview story.
Okay.
Then you have theological construction, which, to be honest with you, is a weird, like, even in the book, it goes on to it. It's like, this is kind of blurring hermeneutics with systematic theology.
Okay.
It's interesting that it's in this book. It's all right. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that being called biblical theology. I may have just showed my hand a little bit. But
is that close to the canonical approach?
No. It is close.
Yeah.
That would be one step further on the theology gradient.
Even more towards the
theological.
Idea.
Yeah. It's phenomenal. The only reason why I don't give it 5 out of 5 stars is I don't think every Christian should read it.
Right.
I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's great.
It's on its topic. It does a fantastic job.
Yeah, and it's super, like, it is introductory, very introductory, but it has some technical terms, and it does require you a little bit of academic buy-in. Great.
Do you feel like you understand biblical theology now?
I do walk away with more questions than answers right now.
That's the nature of it, yeah.
But at least it's better than being in your third year. You're about to think about your paper, and you only have questions.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be terrible, hey?
It does flesh out, like, these are the proposed answers. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like the author's big thing is, let's not get the scholars talking past each other.
Yeah.
Let's start working together. And it's good.
Yeah. Let's bring in some unity to that.
Exactly. But in terms of biblical theology,
oh boy,
most of the time they always start off at Genesis because that's how the book goes.
Yep.
Right close to Genesis, Abraham pops up.
Yes.
Josh, take it away.
Okay. So we're starting a 4-part series, kind of like with our creation one, but now we're doing the Patriarchs and Joseph. Because if you're doing the Patriarchs, it all leads up to Joseph, and Joseph is the capstone of Genesis, and so we've kind of done everything in Genesis except for Cain and Abel and the flood.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say everything.
Do a flood episode.
Yeah.
Just like on a random night.
Yeah. They're backups. Cain and Abel's easy. Where is it?
Is it?
It's a great story. But anyways, we're not talking about Cain and Abel. We're talking about Abraham.
Who are the 4 patriarchs that we're going to cover?
The 4 patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob, also known as Israel, the prototype for the nation of that would be Israel.
Wow.
Hey.
And then also Joseph.
Is Joseph not traditionally called a patriarch?
Technically.
Technically.
Yeah. Because like the patriarchs are whenever God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Oh, I see.
But Genesis presents them in such a unified manner that it's like, the editor of Genesis is clearly thinking go in that direction.
Also, it's the tribes of Israel, the sons of Israel. Joseph is not mentioned, it's two of his sons take his place.
Mm.
And so there's this weird interplay. Like Joseph kind of doesn't exist in the family tree.
Well, he kind of did that to himself when he gave his firstborn.
His brothers
switched
did it
up
to
his
him when
youngers
they.
and-
His brothers did it to him when they killed him.
But this episode's not about Joseph.
Not about Joseph, but now I kind of want to talk about him. So.
You're right, but you get to do Joseph, Joel.
Oh yeah, I forgot that was the episode after research. Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well,
you have that to look forward to. But today we talk about Abraham.
Yeah. So there's some quick historical notes that you have to get into. When does Abraham take place? In the book of Genesis, it's chapter 12 to 25. Yeah. 25 is the death of Abraham. That 13 chapter span in Genesis is 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
It starts when Abraham is 75 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And this takes place after Noah.
Yeah.
When there's limited to 120 years.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Okay. Is this...
We have to get.
We know the answer to this problem.
Do we? Tell me, Josh. Tell me the answer.
From when it takes Noah 120 years to build the ark.
Yep.
So when God says, "I limited these people's life to 120 years, I will not let the Spirit be within them for 120 years." Yeah. That's the point in which it would take for Noah to build the ark
Until the flood comes.
until the flood comes.
Rather than the age that people live.
It's a long time to build a boat, though, isn't it?
It's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a big boat, though.
But I feel like the wood would rot. Never mind. I'm sorry. I'm getting off my own stuff.
But also, that's again the flood.
Yeah.
With Abraham,
Yes.
it's presenting that he lived a really long time, 175 years.
Yes.
People don't live that long.
You're right.
We do.
What do? This is the beautiful part that I love about Abraham is it is the bridge that I'm just going to do it now because it's just a one-off point. The style of the writing quickly shifts. The story before this is the Tower of Babel, chapter 11, and that ends the prehistory myth of Genesis 1 to 11, that kind of writing style, directly into narrative, like historical narrative. The way that the notes, the way it's written, the structure's different. It seems much more real. It's not like you're reading a myth where it's like, and this person built an ark, and then the flood came, and then the birds were given, and then a couple days later, the world's not destroyed anymore. What you start to see is a guy living in a real towns that exist today, doing normal things. He's wealthy, interacts with normal people in historical sites for a long period of time. It's not this one-off story. And so what you get with Abraham, more so than the later books, is this blend of this transition. You get notes of references to that story, meaning the main thing there is there in the covenant, which is going to come up, there is a phrase where he says, "I'm going to make a name for you. And I'm going to bless the nations through you," right? And that's direct referencing the story in the chapter beforehand, which is, let us build a tower to make a name for ourselves. Bring God down.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And so basically, the Tower of Babel ends with man's rise in sin, the opposing God getting together rather than spreading out, building this tower, opposing God. We're going to make a name for ourselves. And then Abraham starts with God's way to fix humanity instead of man's way to fix the problem of sin.
Yeah.
And so you've got this, it's cool. It's now God is interplaying into history and
In a positive way.
in the positive way rather than just these series of destructions and judgments. Though they are good in their own way.
Yep.
And so the story of Abraham takes place over 100 years. He moves, him and his family he lives in the city of Ur. Ur of the Chaldees.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is near Babylon,
It's maybe Proto-Babylon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is near, potentially, it's in the land of Shinar.
Yeah, which would be
near the Tower of
the
Babel.
right region.
Sumer, yeah.
Yeah. He leaves through the Fertile Crescent, gets called by God to move to Canaan with his family.
Yeah.
They move to Haran. They stay for a while. His father there, Terah,
Yeah.
dies there. And then Abraham gets called again to move, lands in Shechem, and then goes down into Canaan. In that time in Canaan, he goes to Egypt for a while. There's the famous story of Sarah might get taken by the king, Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And so Abraham's like, hey, tell him you're my sister, because in places where people have beautiful wives, kings will just kill the husbands to take them. You see that reflected later with David, with Bathsheba. He wants Bathsheba, he kills the husband.
Also, like a
yeah.
favoritism thing going there. Like, if it is
Yeah.
his sister, then he would have favor with the king
Yes.
and be allowed to keep, because he likely had a lot of flocks and stuff like that
Yeah.
at this point,
He
right?
comes out richer than when he went in.
Everywhere Abraham goes, he comes out richer.
Yeah.
Which is part of the blessing. You've got, and then Abraham and Lot have a disagreement about who gets the good land, because two giant wealthy people in this small parcel of land. Canaan is about the size of, if you look on a map, the lower mainland of Canada, British Columbia. It's only 100 kilometers long.
Like New York downtown.
From Vancouver to Hope.
Yeah.
Is the whole land of Israel.
Yeah.
Except ours is horizontal, Israel's vertical. And so there's not a lot of land where they are. So Abraham allows Lot, hey, you pick which region you want, I'll go to the other region. Lot is a dick.
He's like, it's greener over there.
It's greener on the other side, I'm picking that place. Abraham's like, okay. But that ends up screwing over Lot later. Abraham then he meets Melchizedek, the famous man. Kind of theophany, Christophany figure.
Yeah.
Be careful there,
Yeah.
bud.
I'm not. No. It's at least Hebrews makes the connection to Christ, at least in theological meaning in the story.
Yes.
He's the priest
He is
of the
a
Most
type.
High, right?
Sorry,
He's
Yes.
a type
Yes.
of a priest king, which
Yeah.
isn't necessarily the first time even in Genesis, because Adam has
Yes.
those elements going on.
Yeah.
And so
Can we define Christophany for a second? Because that's not super commonly used.
Yeah. So
What's a quick definition of Christophany?
sure.
There we go.
So here, I'll start off with theophany,
Yes.
which is it's a manifestation of God in the physical world.
Mhm.
Yeah. Christophany is just a more specific, that's Jesus' manifestation in the physical world.
Yeah.
But isn't that a little looser than...
It's how, like, a revelation of God in the physical world, revelation of Christ in the physical world.
To a certain degree.
lot of
Like
people-
you would call Paul's vision a Christophany.
Yes.
Yeah,
Or
okay,
a
yeah.
lot of people
Yeah.
draw the man standing in the fire as Christ in Daniel.
Yeah.
Whether or not
No.
that is...
No.
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
The answer's no, but we'll talk
People,
about
a
that
lot of
later.
people
do.
say that.
Even Jacob wrestling with
Yeah.
the angel, which we'll get
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, and
In the
the angel of the
Jacob
Lord stuff, and so there's
Yeah.
figures, and that
Well-
people will say that, and Melchizedek is one of them.
Yes.
He is at very least a type of a
Yeah.
priest king.
I would lean that way. Melchizedek means king of righteousness. He is the king of Salem, which is in the same place as Jerusalem, which is interesting later on because that will become the city where God is worshipped. And Melchizedek is the priest and king of the Lord of the Most High.
And they appear to worship the same God, Abraham. And
Yes. And Abraham gives him 10% of his wealth, which is where you get the tithing later on in Leviticus.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And then
Is it his? I think it's his plunder. Is it his wealth or his plunder?
the plunder he gets from helping
Yeah.
save Lot with the other kings,
Yeah. Okay.
which is cool because this 85-year-old man goes to war with like a couple hundred of his servants and rescues his nephew
Yep.
with
From other kings.
from other kings of cities. states.
Just to straighten it out though.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be thinking of like medieval kings.
No.
No.
You should be thinking like
The big guy who rules.
yeah,
city.
that city town over
Yeah.
there that has a couple hundred, maybe a couple
Yeah.
thousand people in it,
Well,
maybe.
instead of a medieval king, he would be like a medieval lord of a manor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
But still awesome.
yeah. Man, it gives me a Caleb vibes when after the conquering, Caleb, 80-year-old man, God's like, God promised me this mountain. And he's like, yo, Jim, his 20-year-old like shield bearer, we're taking this hill. Yeah, it's a great story. And then Abraham lives in Canaan for 10 years. And then there's the whole Ishmael story where God had promised Abraham a son, but he's old. His wife Sarah's old. They're in their 80s. And Sarah says, hey, take my servant Hagar. This is common practice at the time. There's historical notes of it. You have a child through her, and it'll be counted as mine. Abraham does it. They have a child. It's named Ishmael. Sarah then gets jealous. Yeah, so, but before she gets jealous, you have the covenant of circumcision brought in. God gives the covenant for the second time. The first time is right before he's living in Canaan for 15 years. That one, notably, there's no conditions. And it is the blessings of a son, a nation, land, and that he would be blessed, and through him, the whole world would be blessed. And that's significant because that is later on realized in Christ. A lot of that.
Yes. You could make the argument that other places outside of Israel at times were also blessed because of Israel. And technically, in Genesis, where Joseph is going to be a big one. Yeah. Joseph specifically blesses all of the nations because he stored up the grain in Egypt, and everybody survives the famine because of that.
Yeah, and you see the promise of blessing is everywhere Abraham leaves, he gets wealthier. He's given wealth. He's in battles. He ends up taking plunder. When he leaves Egypt, he gets wealthier. God provides for him, constantly showing that faithfulness to the promise. He doesn't see the nation. The only part of the land that he gets is his burial plot. That he has this really fun argument when he's dying where he's like, I want to buy it. And they're like, no, you've been so good to us. We want to give it to you. No, I want to buy it. No, you've been so good to us. We want to give it to you. No, I want to buy it. Come on, don't make me do this. They're like, no, we're giving it to you. And then
it's like two Mennonites arguing.
Yeah. And so he gets this plot of land. It's given to him. He's blessed. He gets the son. The nation comes later. God promises him. He tells him 400 years when my grace for this area is up, when the Amorites have reached their point, your people will be freed from Egypt and freed from bondage and
made into a nation
and annihilate these people as my judgment on the world, on this specific area for their sins. So after that covenant, you got the birth of Ishmael. Then the covenant is sealed through circumcision. And that is, there's one condition brought in, but it's a different condition from like the Levitical law conditions, where it's like you have to do this, blah, 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 because this is a practice of initiation, the seal and sign of the covenant, and then that condition is done.
Right.
You can't undo circumcision.
There's no jokes.
Many
Keep
have
going.
tried.
Yeah. It's just anatomical. And so once you're in, you're in. And from then on, God is faithful to hold the promise, even when you sin. And you see that throughout Abraham's story.
Yes.
Abraham sins. He does these horrible things, like almost getting Pharaoh and a bunch of people in Egypt killed by lying about Sarah's identity.
Did he lie? We'll get into
half-sister.
Half-sister.
I mean, explicitly, yes, but doesn't matter.
And then you've got later on with Ishmael trying to fulfill the covenant himself, the promise himself, by creating a child. But God tells him, hey, don't do that. But then there's no punishment.
Do you think that has to do with the unilateral covenant of Abraham? Like
yes. So you're right. When the covenant is made, when they enter the valley, he has to cut up the animals in half to set on either side of the hill so that the blood runs down the middle, and then the two parties walk through. And then if anybody breaks the conditions of the covenant, the person who breaks it will be made like the animals that they walk through. That's what a covenant is.
And that's an excellent example of God using the surrounding culture of Abraham to affirm his relation to Abraham.
Yeah.
It's just so cool.
It's one of the coolest parts. But God goes through alone. He makes Abraham sleep, and he goes through alone, telling him, signifying that it's on my faithfulness.
Yeah.
If
Abraham, there is no weight on Abraham's part to fulfill and upkeep his end.
Yeah, except later on the circumcision, which brings him into it. And that's important because you see then, but the reason why is because part of it is he's not given the law. Moses is given the law later. They enter the Mosaic covenant. And that one has that conditional aspect.
It's much different, yeah.
Yeah. It's not that you do the thing to get the blessing. It's that through continual sin and breaking of the covenant, you are finally cut off, which is important. And then you've got the Sodom and Gomorrah story that everybody, even non-Christians, know. Lot has some guests over, some angels, and they go to bring him out because God is going to judge the city. And so God sends 2 angels on the behalf of Abraham, who asks him, hey, can you get my nephew out of there? And so he brings them out. The city is judged. Fire rains down from heaven onto the city. Then you go, and then Lot's wife is turned into a pillar of salt because she turns around when God says, don't turn around. Abimelech, another story like the Pharaoh story. They go into town. Abimelech takes Sarah. God visits Abimelech in a dream and says, hey, if you touch her, I'm going to kill you and everybody you know. And then Abimelech's like, whoa, wait, I had no idea. I haven't touched her, blah, blah, blah. And God's like, cool, we're good. Don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. And you didn't know. And then you have the birth of Isaac. Sarah gets jealous. Sarah tells Abraham to get Hagar out of here. Abraham says, okay, sends Hagar out.
Reluctantly.
Because it's his kid.
And what he perceives to be the fulfillment of the prophecy to some extent.
It's actually God who's like, yeah, let them go.
Yeah.
Because Abraham's like, I don't know, this feels bad.
Yeah. But she has the kid. But when Hagar goes and she's getting thirsty, she's dying of thirst because she's in the desert. And she can't bear to see Ishmael die. She puts him underneath a bush and she goes around a rock and hides. And then an angel comes. He's like, hey, what? God sees you. He promised to Abraham blessing of his children. You're not the promised child, but I still promised that I would bless him and his family. So she finds water because of the angel. Ishmael's taken care of.
And that great nation will be coming out of him too, but just not the chosen nation.
Yeah. And that's a key note, not just there's much to take away from that story, but specifically with the themes we're going to get to is God's faithfulness. Even when you are unfaithful, God is faithful. And so then you get to the offering of Isaac as a sacrifice, the great story. We'll get into that specifically in a bit. Then the death of Sarah when Abraham is 137 years old. Abraham then sends a servant to get Isaac a wife. Abraham dies at 175.
You skipped over a point there. It's not
Yes.
important, and everyone skips over it. But his second wife, Keturah,
Yes.
or whatever, has a son, Midian, who then has the tribe of the Midianites, which is then Jethro, the Midianite,
Yes.
who is a priest. And I think that he serves Yahweh, and he helps get the Israelites back out of Egypt. So I just think it's cool that even through Abraham's line, God is working outside of Egypt as well as within.
Yeah.
I just think it's cool.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like we could camp on so many of those things that are
Like, I want to go back to Melchizedek. That's what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm like, why does that matter so much?
We're gonna do that, but I feel like we got to get through some of the structures of the story. Caleb, you put in that there's a structure to the story of Abraham.
Oh boy! All right,
You'll never guess what kind of structure it is.
We only talk about one.
It's a chiasm, everybody. Okay, so chiasm, real short, 2 points, and then imagine they're going to the right and they converge in the middle, kind of forming an arrow.
Yes, or a greater than symbol.
Well, in Hebrew, they go to the left.
Wow.
No, It's the chiasm is based on the key of Greek, the X, and so the middle point.
Anyway,
Yeah.
So
Is it actually?
Yeah.
the center point is the most important. That's what it's trying to be emphasized. That's like the interpretive key, even sometimes.
Yeah. The first and the last verses or chapters or stories match in theme. The second first and the second last match. That pattern goes all the way to the middle.
Yes.
Until, yeah.
And so I'm going to try to run through it as fast as I can.
Yeah.
I'm going to say 1A for like the top portion, and then the matching number, and B is the matching on the coming out of the middle portion.
A descending down, B ascending up.
So you have the genealogy of Terah as 1A, and that's in chapter 11. You have the promise of a nation, the start of Abraham's spiritual odyssey in chapter 12, beginning of chapter 12, and that's 2A. 3A, God protects and enriches Abraham despite his deceitfulness in Egypt, which is the last part of 12. 4A, Abraham chooses land by faith, and Lot chooses it by sight, which is beginning of 13. And actually, I think it's all of 13. 5A, Abraham intercedes for Sodom and Lot in war, and so that's when he goes to war with those kings,
Rescues them.
Yeah, and that's also the Sodom. No, it's not the Sodom and Gomorrah. That's where he goes to, because he talks to the king of Sodom, and he gives him back some of the riches too. Yeah, that's what's
so
going
that
on
he
there.
didn't couldn't be said that he was enriched because of Sodom.
Exactly, and then you have the center portion, which is 6A and 6B, so they're matching in this case, which is between chapters 15 and 18. So it's 6A, the land covenant with Abraham and Ishmael being born, and then 6B, the seed covenant with Abraham and Isaac being born. And so you have the two sons. One of the covenant.
Apex.
Yes, that's the middle portion. You have the son that came through human effort, trying to bring about God's plan, God's promise, and then the actual son of the covenant, son of the promise, and the continuation of Abraham's seed. And then coming out of the center portion, so 5B, Abraham intercedes for Sodom and Lot in prayer. That's when Sodom gets wiped off the map and Lot gets taken out, out of the city.
Which is the parallel to Sodom and Lot at war.
Exactly. 4B, Lot flees doomed Sodom and settles in Moab, and that would be when that's parallel to when Lot chose the other land by sight, the green part of Canaan.
So he's moving in because it was good. Now he's moving out because he realizes this place sucks.
It was not good. 3B, God protects and enriches deceitful Abraham in Philistia, which is paralleling with when he was deceitful in Egypt. And so this portion 3B is with Abimelech. 2B, birth of Isaac, and the climax of, I guess the other two weren't births. The other two were the birth of birth of Ishmael, and then 6B was the promise of Isaac. But 2B is the birth of Isaac, and then the climax of Abraham's spiritual odyssey, which is the sacrifice or the binding of Isaac. And then ending with in 1B the genealogy of Nahor.
Yeah.
How overt is this chiastic structure? Because this is the first one I've seen, and I'm like, I don't know about that.
Bruce Waltke goes over it for pages and pages and pages. I'm going to try to put this chiastic structure somehow in the comments of the YouTube video, because I'm sorry we just ran through that real hard, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, this is one of the ones where it's like the one in Noah is like it's matched with verses. So it's easy to see if you put all the verses together. You can see like, oh, the phrasing is the same. This one is a themed chiasm. And so you have to understand the theme of each of these stories and then read it as a whole to see the chiastic structure. So it's much harder to find.
Well, it's a method of scripture interpreting scripture.
Yeah.
Right? If you can find parallel verses that can then speak into each other, which is interesting.
Yeah. So that's cool because this leads directly into themes. And three of the themes two major themes and one kind of just that's there. The two major themes are covenant and faithfulness. He brings up promise. I kind of put that in, it's in both because God makes a promise through the covenant, and God is faithful to those promises. But faithfulness also, a lot of people focus, especially the New Testament, focuses on the faithfulness of Abraham. You've got the Stephen speech, you've got the Paul listen, and
Paul both in Romans and Corinthians and Galatians. Sorry.
and the Hebrews by faith.
Yes.
Speech where he goes through all these characters and it says by faith Abraham, blah blah blah. But the story, I feel, I think I see it, is squarely pointing out in every story the faithfulness of God in every single event.
Well, the center point of that chiasm is Ishmael's born, which is him trying to bring about the covenant, and then the matching center point, the pair of the center points, is then Isaac is like, Sarah is going to be the mother of the covenant child, the promised
God
child. Not, you can't bring it out by your own effort. And then he gives him the covenantal seal of
Now here's the thing. You're looking at your 90-year-old wife going, we're going to have a child.
She laughs at you.
They laugh at
She
him.
laughs at you for anatomical reasons. You can't have a child when you're 90. But they don't know what it means when God says you're going to have a child.
Well, Abraham does, it appears.
Yeah.
But he backs out of that real easy when faced with confrontation.
Yeah.
Which there's some parallels there with Adam and Eve in that story. Yeah. If you want to get real deep into that specific story, go watch the Bible Project podcast on Abraham. They do a really good job on it.
It's also so long.
Yeah. But that specific story, that guy does a great job at showing you the parallels. And I don't think we should copy him and just redo what he did. So you've got the themes. You've got faithfulness. Let's do covenant first. God makes the covenant with Abraham. It's why he pulls him to the land. He says, I'm going to make covenant, shows him the stars and the skies, and says, I'm going to give you descendants as many as these.
So just for a reminder, what exactly does covenant mean? Where does it come from?
Covenant,
Well, it's that the birds and the beasts thing that we mentioned earlier.
yeah, because you literally, the phrase is cut a covenant.
Would a contract be a close approximation?
Oh.
You get in trouble if you followed it to its full conclusion, but it's close enough.
Colloquially,
Yes,
colloquially,
it's the
sure.
closest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just trying to relate it to someone who might not understand.
yeah. It's related to vassal treaties. But the covenant specifically is between two people. You make an agreement, and the conditions are heavy. And
Like everything back then.
yeah,
Consequences are dire.
the consequences are dire because you go to a valley, like in the story, you cut the animals in half, you put them on either side of the hills so that the blood runs down into the valley, and you walk through it, symbolizing if you break the conditions of the covenant, you will be like these.
Now,
cut you in
that was
half.
like the highest form of looking at covenants too.
Yes.
There was like other ways they did it, like a hand under the thigh and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which is modern day.
Or
I don't know.
Jonathan and David's covenant.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a covenant can be used as like a promise, but it can also be used as like a vow, you know, that kind of thing.
I've seen this one compared to like what lords of houses or kings would make for the Abrahamic covenant specifically.
Like a pledge of allegiance to a lord would be very close.
And the covenant God makes with Abraham does match a lot of the prototypical versions of a suzerain vassal treaty, but a lot of that comes in heavier with the covenant of Moses because he's making it between a God and a nation. Here he's making it with a man. And so you see more of those personal aspects, whereas later you see a lot of the more kingdom aspects of a covenant. But God is faithful. And every time Abraham is faced with the potential failure of God to carry through his promise, and Abraham tries to fill in the gap, God proves to him his faithfulness with Sarah having a kid.
Sarah being given to Pharaoh as well.
Sarah being given to Pharaoh, and he's like, "Oh, if you die, this can't happen." let's make sure this doesn't happen. God's like, no, I've got you. It's just he doesn't have the Bible to look back on and see the evidence of God's faithfulness.
To be fair, when he leaves his family's land, as far as we know, as modern readers and whatnot, he left behind his household gods. Mm-hmm. He follows a relatively, as far as we can tell, unknown God to him.
Yes.
Who promises him land and perhaps and descendants. So it's not like he's, like you're saying, he looks at the Bible and goes, "Oh, God always fulfills all his promises all the time," and that makes sense.
It's a leap of faith, you could say.
Yeah. The only counter to that idea that I've heard is he is from the descendants of people that had relationships with God from Noah. So he may have been from like the family line.
This is true. My counter to that is that when they when they interact with his like family relatives back home, to get a husband for Isaac and Jacob, technically, they have household gods.
Exactly.
And the one leaves and the one takes their household gods. And so if anything, I think the text indicates his old family had separate gods.
Yep. And near the end, we'll get into Sarah. So you've got covenant, heavy theme. The covenant is reinitiated multiple times. You've got the major covenant when he shows them the stars and the sand and the seashore, and he says, "You'll have as these, you'll have a nation, you will have a son, and I will bless you in the whole world."
I have a question.
Yes.
Because I read a couple different books for this.
Yeah.
Trying to prep for this. Several will go, they're the same covenant being expanded or given more definition. Others will say these are different covenants that God is making with Abraham. Yeah. How do you react to that, Josh?
I think so. In reading on the covenant where the circumcision is brought in, it's a narrowing focus on the nation and the family, the descendants aspect. And so it's still about that major covenant, but because what is circumcision? Circumcision is you're physically creating a physical marker on your body that you're a part of a group of people, a family, or a nation, which is directly related to the covenant. It's the sign that you're a part of that family and that nation.
It's also no small thing that it occurs right after Ishmael's birth.
Yeah.
And that whole Ishmael stuff.
Not just that, it's a lot of scholars bring it into why circumcision, why the genitals? Well, because that's where descendants come from. So the symbol, well, and then you relate to baptism later on. Why water, right? Why this symbol of being buried and raising again? Because of the resurrection, the promised resurrection. And so you see the symbol of the covenant of initiation is a sign of the promise that is being given through the initiation process.
Yep.
And so the circumcision being brought into that family, that nation through which the covenant is made, which that ties it directly to that covenant. It's at least a narrowing if it's not the same.
Okay.
And then the last one, God adds more, mentions the covenant again at the sacrifice of Isaac, that blessing of the whole world. And there you see not only is that story, and this gets into your book earlier about biblical theology, what is the relationship between New and Old Testament? How are we supposed to read it as a continuity, as a history, or redemptive arc? The themes directly relate to stuff that happens in the New Testament. He provides a child for Abraham, but also through the sacrifice of Isaac, you see themes directly related to Christ. God will provide a lamb in substitute, the Lamb of God, Jesus. And he is sacrificed.
Okay, so he goes down south, right?
Yeah.
Do you think, because like people debate, the mountain range, I forget the name of it already. Moriah, yeah. It was started with an M, but I wasn't confident enough to go and sacrifice his son, right?
Yeah.
And there's like the whole thing of like, hey, we will go up and we will come back down, he tells his servants. And it's like almost as though he expects something's going to happen because he knows it's Isaac.
Yeah.
What do you think of the people who go the same mountain as Jesus was crucified on, or at least same mountain range, or like at the very least we know it's the same small location?
They're within a few kilometers of each other. Yeah, because if it's all in that 100 kilometer land, it's like he might have been sacrificed in Abbotsford, and Jesus was sacrificed on the mountain between Abbotsford and Langley.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know if that analogy is going to track very well.
Yeah.
look at
Just
a map.
knowing where our listeners come
Look at a
from.
map.
But yeah.
Look at the Lower Mainland, British Columbia.
Read a book. No,
Think of Mount Rushmore, and it's just one head over, you know?
Can you figure out where we live?
but there's a cool like cosmic drama going on if that happens.
Oh, it's so awesome.
It's very cool, yeah.
Now, here's the thing. Isn't that also what they claim is in the Muslim faith?
Yes.
Islam.
Ishmael.
Temple Rock.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know enough
Yeah.
about that to really throw.
I don't know
down.
I don't know if that's true.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that a lot of Muslims claim that it's Ishmael who is sacrificed and not Isaac who is sacrificed.
Like you're talking about Dome of the Rock?
Yeah.
Okay. That's also
I know
where-
that Isaac and Ishmael in Islam build it
Yeah.
together.
Isn't that where Muhammad also was last
Yeah.
seen? And like that's another reason why it's a
Yeah.
holy site for them.
Yeah. It's like second to Mecca in importance. Yeah.
Isn't there a piece? Isn't
There is a
Medina?
rock in the middle.
there's a rock in the middle? I thought
Yeah.
we'll have to clarify some things after the
Yes.
podcast.
We'll do a Abrahamic religions episode later. Not in this one.
That'd be so cool.
Um,
Hey, wait, no, let's finish the cosmic drama thing. I
Yes.
had a whole point there.
Joel, take us away.
Okay, cool. If God is standing outside of time, and if he is truly a friend of Abraham, kind of a thing, then at the same time he is sacrificing his son.
Yeah.
On the cross, he sees Abraham
Yeah.
doing the same.
And then he provides a sacrifice. Or
Mhm.
a substitute.
yeah,
Substitute
which
sacrifice.
is crazy that
Archetypal, you could say.
It is archetypal. Yeah, we'll say
Yeah.
is it theophany maybe? I don't know if it is. I don't know. I'm not enough of a systematician to throw
It's a
that
ram
one
he
down.
provides, right?
Yeah. It's a ram. Anyways,
Yeah.
there's a cool thing with Azazel in there, but that's not really a
Let's
thing.
know.
No, we won't talk about.
no.
This isn't about demons. This is something else.
How very
I lost
Catholic
my
of
train of
you.
thought.
Very cool.
How very
Yeah.
Catholic of you.
I felt like I was constructing
Yeah.
a cinematic universe, and then I went off on
Yep.
demons again.
Yep.
Happens to everyone, doesn't
Well, if
it?
you're going to construct a cinematic universe, demons have to come into it.
Oh, absolutely.
In the later seasons, when you're running out of ideas,
Look at Marvel.
Anyway,
like Marvel, man, this went nowhere.
Okay, can I bring in more of the? I'm going to bring in more of the covenant aspects into
more?
the New Testament. Yeah. You get the promise of a land. Canaan becomes the land of Israel, and that becomes the land where the kingdom, the people, the descendants of God live. The descendants of Abraham live. You've also got the nation, Israel itself. The descendants of Abraham go to Egypt. They become the Hebrews. The Hebrews become the Israelites.
And they're supposed to bless all the nations around them with their knowledge and relationship with God, much
Yes.
like how Abraham was going to bless
Yes.
the nations.
Yes.
Connection.
But because they failed and God is faithful, he provided a child, Jesus,
Yes.
that lived in the land of Israel, that brought the kingdom of God.
the new land, quote unquote.
Yep. That
Kind of.
and the people in that kingdom, Christians,
As numerous as the stars.
in the heavens, blah blah blah,
Sand in the seashore.
in the seashore, spread across the world and bless the nations.
Yep.
And you see another tie back into the Tower of Babel through Pentecost when that is realized. I will make a name for you. I will bless the nations through you.
Yep.
Blah, 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 blah. And that's a dope story.
Welcome to a
Dope
biblical
story word. Yeah, I agree.
Welcome to a biblical theology of bless the nations through Abraham.
Well, the thing is that Abraham starts to be, well, I don't want to say a type, but he is the quote unquote quintessential character in the Bible of which a lot of theology and stuff and
Yeah.
everything derives from Abraham, the seed of Abraham,
Yeah.
from that point on kind of thing.
Every time faithfulness is brought up, Abraham's name is right in that text.
Arguably, it's the start of history in the Bible as well,
Yeah.
Arguably, yeah.
Paul name drops Abraham all the time.
many times.
Yeah.
Just like, hey, remember
Heavily.
Abraham? They're like, yeah, we remember Abraham.
Well, and that gets well, and
Somebody's tired.
yeah. And so then you've got, you brought up the history point. That what I thought was cool was there's continuity there's arguments for Abraham existing. There's arguments for Abraham not existing as a person in history. I think with the amount that's written about him and the fact that the Jews are here, it would be hard for him not to exist. That's fine.
It's also written in the style of this was a real person. It's not like even Genesis 1 to 11 where you could make an argument that some of these people didn't exist or not or whatever. Yeah. This is very different.
Yeah. So this takes place around 2000 to 1800 BC. Mm-hmm. One of the continuity errors is we have no proof that camels in mass are domesticated and herded at that time.
Can you tie that? Because it sounds like you just went random fact.
Yeah, what?
It can't be Abraham. There's no camels.
No. The point is that when Abraham sends his servant to go get a wife for Isaac, he brings with him 10 camels that carry the stuff for Rebecca and the family, the dowry or whatever. And the argument is, well, that couldn't have happened because we have no historical evidence that camels in mass were domesticated and herded at that time and used in such a way.
A giant mass of them wouldn't have to be, just 10 of them.
Yeah. But as a man who had camels, sheep, blah, 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 they're like, hey, well, he can have all the other things, but not camels. And my argument is, well, maybe you just haven't found the historical evidence yet. Like, that's not an argument like from absence. I'm just saying there's still time. There's many times in the biblical archaeology where they're like, this couldn't have happened.
Like the entire Hittite Empire.
Yeah, the Hittites don't exist.
Until they found
and then
them.
in the 70s, they found the third biggest empire in the Middle East. Yeah. Competing with Egypt and the Assyrians for forever.
Yep.
But then also you've got the Cyrus cylinder. Oh, emperors wouldn't get rid of all their slaves. And then the Cyrus cylinder's found, and it's an edict that says, hey, get rid of all the slaves, send them back home.
We're going to rule with nice.
David wasn't a real person, and they find evidence.
Coins with David, king of Israel.
Yes.
There's also inscriptions.
It's his son.
Yes.
And then it's,
sorry.
This is,
yeah.
I can't think of his son's name. Shlomo. It's the Hebrew.
Solomon?
Shlomo? You could think of Shlomo. You couldn't think of Solomon?
Yeah, I know that.
Crazy.
It is the funnier of the two.
Shlomo's funny.
He doesn't sound as wise.
Yeah, no, it's Solomon, son of David.
Shlomo sounds like Solomon's brother that doesn't get the spotlight.
That's why he sounded so wise, because he always spoke in Shlomo. That was dumb.
That's gonna get canceled.
I think we won't need to talk about David for very much longer, but
but there is another historical thing is there is what's known as the Mari tablet, which is in the city of, I have it here, the city of Mari, which is the capital of the.
You nailed it.
I thought it was in another town, and I was like, "Oh no, the Mari tablet is from the city of Mari."
You guys got mad at me for doing Shlomo.
It served as the capital of the Amorites.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Can we get back into this, guys?
Oh, you're into it. We're still.
I'm glad we brought some comedy into this.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so Mari was the thriving city and became the capital of the Amorites. It started in 2800 BC. His first historical note, that's 300 years older than the pyramids. And then to 1760, it became...
Now, how old are the pyramids?
The pyramids are dated to 2500 BC.
Okay, who dated the pyramids?
All right, let's stay on track. That's funny. But
Okay,
I'm
so the
getting
city
less
of
and less
Mari
intelligent as
became
the podcast goes on.
the capital of the Amorites around 2000 to 1760, which is near the time of, which is in that direct time of Abraham. And on that, there was 15,000 clay tablets that were found in that city.
Holy moly.
Jeez.
Yeah, but they're like the size of like
That's 100,000 more mummies than were found in the pyramids.
Stop.
That's a good one.
So 15,000 clay tablets written in cuneiform were
Not even
found.
the same number.
Podcast listener, you're just gonna have to give us a moment.
Let's get a little.
Oh, great. Deep breath. Josh,
Shlomo
tell
and
me
get back on
about the
track.
Tablet of Mari.
Yes. So the Mari tablets come from the city of Mari, which starts in like 2800 BC to 1760 BC. It becomes the capital in 2000 BC of the Amorites, which is a known biblical nation around Israel, which is also where Abraham was circling in those areas. Well, they found 15,000 clay tablets written in cuneiform. They're like the size of a palm, most of them. They found them in the ruins, and they would just get like thrown into like storerooms in areas. They found the same thing in Uruk, where they just found like 5,000. It's one of the earliest records of writing at 5,000 BC. But on one of them, there's like letters, treaties. So you see the pattern of treaties like the covenant with Abraham. You see the pattern of like literary works, like stuff like that. Letters, like taxes.
Yeah, a lot of receipts for some reason. Yeah,
there was one tablet in the Uruk one that was like, "Hey, to Olamon and Olanu, the son of Olamon, on your way to Damascus, make sure when you're passing through these three cities, if you're there's going to be tariffs at the gates. You can also go through the back roads, like the side roads that don't go through the towns, but you're going to have to worry about like thieves, right?" And it's like 5,000 BC. And it's just like they're worried about taxes, trade tariffs. Also, the oldest reference to Damascus. But on one of them specifically is the notice, a cultural practice, which is if you have a wife and she can't produce a child because she's either barren or culturally unsupposed to remain celibate, her servant would take over and have a kid. But then if the actual wife produced a child, the right of firstborn would pass from the oldest child of the servant to the oldest child of the actual wife, which is what you see with Hagar and Sarah even though Ishmael's the oldest, the birthright is given to Isaac.
Right.
So the idea is that it's the firstborn of the first wife.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And that's like legally binding under who? Or it's just like common practice?
Culturally.
Okay.
And so what's so interesting about that is, and then also there's mentionings of a city named Nahor and the mentionings of the city that's still around, Haran, the city that you could go to in Turkey, which is also the game. There's a zombie game that takes place in Haran. That city's probably named after
Dying Light?
Dying Light. Oh, it's named. You're playing a zombie game in a city named after Abraham's grandfather.
Cool.
Yeah, and there's another town named Nahor, which is his uncle, which Nahor doesn't exist anymore, but in this tablet it does. Probably named after Abraham's uncle, which is so cool. And that's where the historical evidence for Abraham ends.
Fair enough.
Other than the Bible, which is a massively historical book, but yeah, that was just some of the historical stuff that I thought was really interesting. Did we want to get into specific stories that we like?
I think that it's worth going over, especially the binding of Isaac.
Okay, yeah.
Let's go around the table. Everyone do a story.
I think.
Story time.
Is there any
Second
other ones?
Rate
Because
Saints.
binding of Isaac might be a good one to save for last.
I think, yeah. Let's save it for last, and so that everybody knows, Caleb is doing Isaac.
I'm doing Isaac next week, and
so
you'll hear it then.
That's probably going to come up a lot.
Actually,
Even
not.
though it's in Abraham's story, it's still...
It's going to come up.
Yeah.
It's not a major theme. It means more for Abraham than it does for Isaac.
Yep.
It means stuff for Isaac.
As we find out through Jacob.
Yes. But it has more significance for Abraham.
Kind of traumatic, if you think about it.
Yeah, Jacob calls God the fear of Isaac with a capital F.
That's in English, though. But
Yeah, but the emphasis on...
There's a capital F in the Hebrew
Yeah.
too. Come on.
Yeah.
okay, so one of the things that I like, though,
Yeah.
is if we're going to share stories that we like from Abraham stuff, is when he goes in to intercede on behalf of Sodom.
Yes.
It's so cool to me.
Yeah.
And it's, it's like, what about 50 righteous people? What about, what about 20? What about 10? And it's just, and then he just kind of goes, okay, well, I guess, will the Lord of all the earth do what is right?
Yeah.
You just trust God. And that's, for whatever reason, I always find myself, like when I'm, especially after a long conversation or whatever about theodicy and how does God work with, human suffering and how does judgment work and why are these people just getting away with stuff? And then at the end, I'm just, right, okay, Lord of all the earth will do what is right. He's, okay. I don't know. It's something that I always my brain always just brings back up. I like it. It's good.
That's cool.
What I like about that story is you would think talking to a god, as we've seen in earlier Genesis, wipes out the entire planet, Tower of Babel, just creates multiple languages and forces it upon individuals that they spread out.
Even Sodom and Gomorrah, which happens in this segment.
Abraham talks to him and he asks him the same question 7 times. Where he's like, hey, if there was 50 righteous men in this town, would you kill them? And God's like, no, I would not judge the city if 50 righteous men are in the town. Hey, God, can I ask you one more question? Yeah, what's up?
Yeah.
Would you do it if there was 40?
Well, it's Abraham coming, like in a very real moment, realizing the type of God that he's in a covenant with.
Yeah.
But also the state of humanity.
The depth
Yes.
of
That it's
sin.
like, it's not just, so there's not 50 people in that, righteous people in that city. Oh, there's not 20 righteous people in that city. Oh,
There's not a single one.
okay. And so it reveals God's position and his grace and his character to Abraham, and it reveals the state of humanity to Abraham. And it's it's so good.
Just to mention a small, tiny tangent. Does the Jonah story and how Jonah expects for the destruction of Nineveh tie at all with this story?
Linguistically, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Um,
Is there a
thematically?
thematic ties? Yeah.
I mean, they're both standing on the outside of a city going, God, do something. They're opposites.
Yeah.
But I don't think so, because in Abraham's account, he's kind of like, there's got to be righteous people in there. And according to both God and Jonah, the Ninevites, there's not enough righteous people in there.
The other thing I like about this story is this is where Western law gets the articulation for presumption of innocence.
Really? You think so?
Yes. So Blackstone's ratio, William Blackstone, who created the English version of it in the 1760s, directly quotes the story of Abraham.
Interesting.
And he says it is better that 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent man.
Really?
Is
interesting.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
I know that's a key part of American law. But
and so America got it from them. And there's like some other stories throughout history that are related to that story.
I've learned something.
Yeah, but it
on the podcast.
Yeah, what the heck?
And they mix it with, because the Western world is, as Tom Holland's book Dominion that we have mentioned on the podcast before, mentions is the developing Western culture out of Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah.
And so you also get the sovereignty of the individual being made in the image of God. So every individual
Human rights, all that kind of stuff.
Human rights, right? And so his ratio was, it is better that 10 guilty persons escape than that one innocent man suffers. And he directly quotes this story, and he's saying, God got Lot and his family out. And then he destroyed the town.
Because there was nobody else.
Because there was nobody else. But as long as Lot was there, God said he wouldn't destroy it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Because that's the final formulation. He says, if there is 10 righteous men there, I will not destroy the city.
Okay, I have a question, though. Is Lot righteous? Or is it a favor to Abraham?
Maybe.
I think it's quote unquote counted as righteous because he takes in the two angels that are sent in, and then he tries to protect them, which is like, and that's a huge thing in that culture, inviting a stranger in.
You protect them with your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Without just devolving into Sodom and Gomorrah stuff. Yeah, and so I think it's fair to say, he's not righteous in that New Testament perfect type sense, but it's that he is faithful to his word.
Yep.
And that's more than enough for God to go, okay, I need to get him out of the city because I'm going to destroy the city.
Yep. Yeah. And so, yeah, that story's super cool because of that. And its relationship to modern day law and how we value
innocent until proven guilty. Whoa, man, that's easy for you to say.
Presumption of innocence too.
Yeah. Joel, did you have a story?
I just like Melchizedek. I'll
Yeah.
always talk about Melchizedek. Came across
I have a bone to pick with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're saying Melchizedek.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I know. There's
Is
a
that
lot
not
of
how you
people
say
that
it?
argue over this. Is it Melchizedek or is it Melchizedek?
Oh,
Let me look it up in
I've
Hebrew
always-
right now.
Because the word is Melech and Zadik.
Yeah, but are you looking at how they would have used it in the Greek or the Hebrew?
Right.
Why would they use it in the Greek?
But it is in English. It is spelled CH. So I understand it,
That's just Melchizedek, dude.
and
It's probably a
and I'm willing to bend the knee on
It
that.
super seems like you're not willing.
Bone to pick. I'll give it
I
up.
got a bone to pick with you. It's not an issue, but here we go.
It's fine.
Anyways,
What's the consensus?
Come on, we need to prove Josh wrong. I mean, find out who's right.
Melchizedek?
Well, that's not right. It's
I'm
Melchizedek.
just looking at the Hebrew. What do you want?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's how he would have said it, probably, if he introduced himself.
yeah.
Or a controversial opinion, he may have said, "I'm Jesus." There are a weird section of people that believe that this is Christ in physical form in the Old Testament.
A lot of it's because of his use in Hebrews, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, calling Christ
Exclusively.
the order of
Yeah.
not exclusively. It's also in Psalms.
No, but the argument of why people make this claim is because of Hebrews.
Yeah, but
But tied
It's
in
also
with Psalms as well a little bit.
in the Psalms tied into messianic prophecy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, anyways, it's a whole thing.
I'm with Joel on this one.
One of the order of
I'm not even
If
arguing for
Hebrews
this
wasn't
point.
there, people wouldn't make the argument.
If you look up Melchizedek, you're going to find people who see him as a Christophany in a physical form. And that's cool to me.
What do you think about that?
I don't think it's right. I don't think it's true.
Is it?
He's a type. He's the Christ figure in that story because of how he behaves.
But you also have to think of him as like, why would he be there as a... It says he was a man of God, doesn't it?
He's
Or
a
a prophet.
priest of the
He's-
Most High.
Prophet of the
The
Most High. That's
priest
what it
of
is.
the Most High.
Priest of the Most High.
Priest King.
Right? So then people have to reconcile that with, well, how? Because there wasn't an order of the Most High yet,
Well,
which is not true.
No, here's the other thing.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing. Have you heard the arguments that it's Shem?
Yeah.
What? Really?
It's just Shem.
Yeah, because Shem, by his age, if you match Shem's age to the what is it? The genealogy from Shem to Abraham,
Yeah,
Shem should still be alive.
that's pretty cool.
How was that tying with Babel, though?
Well, no, because if
I don't think it does.
yeah,
Well,
Whatever.
if you're going to make a historical claim for
No,
genealogy, you have to do it for that
Hey.
too, right?
hey,
Do you?
Why not?
maybe.
Why would you?
Because it's all tied in with the same themes and ideas, right?
I don't know. It's talking about people group. The point would just be that he's still alive.
And Shem, son of Noah, knew God
He would be one of the
through
leaders.
Noah,
Yeah,
and that
So your whole
his
thing-
his descendants, Shem's descendants, I believe, in the
Here's the thing. I don't
Yeah,
like
after-
that either. I think you're wrong.
yeah, you're right. You're right.
they're associated with Egypt, not
Where
with
is it?
Melchizedek. Shem is associated with Egypt. At the end of Babel.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Our fact sheet had Sheila.
We're gonna have to do a whole episode
Yeah.
on Melchizedek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Its ties in Psalms
See, I
and
told
in
you it's
Hebrews.
interesting.
Oh, it is interesting. We've talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's also a good example for scholars, but anybody also to develop their understanding of how the New Testament uses the Old, and how should we then read the Old Testament in light of the New. How do we do that? It's a great example of how that relationship should be worked out.
Right.
Test case for your hermeneutics.
Just read Hebrews.
And not that Answers in Genesis article that I was referring to.
Another thing. With Abraham, when he goes to Egypt, gives Sarah to Pharaoh as his sister, who's also his wife, does he lie? Only because I keep hearing people talk about it.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, including professors, disagree with us.
Really?
About what?
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Sorry, I totally zoned out.
Our professor disagrees with us.
He doesn't think that?
Well, because it's a
he doesn't
it's a
lie.
half truth
He says it's because he was God told him to do it, which is not true. He tells Isaac to do it in Isaac's story, but not to Abraham.
It gets into some interesting hermeneutics of how you should read narrative. If a pattern exists in point A and then at point B, that same pattern shows up, and then there's slight modifications, should you read those modifications back into point A? I would say no.
Well,
that's the argument from Isaac, and then reading it back into Abraham's time.
He also intentionally hides the truth to trick Pharaoh. Not trick Pharaoh, but to basically not die.
Yeah. To both Pharaoh and Abimelech.
An obfuscation of truth is a type of lying, if we want to go that far. Nowadays, we would say, no, that's wrong. You should absolutely not do it. So why don't we say it for Abraham, kind of thing?
Because he's the
progenitor of everything.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's lying. I think it shows that. I think it goes. You have the comment that's not related, like in exegetical terms, but I think its plain understanding can be used here. Our faithlessness doesn't nullify God's faithfulness, and I think that's what's being pushed through there. That's what's being shown.
Yeah.
I bring it up because when we go over Isaac, I'll probably ask the similar question because it's a little contextualized differently there, but we can ignore it for now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What story do I like? I like, because of what the Bible Project did, I really like the story of when the three men come to Abraham.
Yeah.
And I'm not getting into the, like, is it God and the two angels that go to Sodom and Gomorrah, or is it the Trinity? Whatever.
Which part is this in?
I've heard it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when God goes back to Abraham and he says, in a year you'll have a child.
This is when Sarah laughs.
Yeah. Sarah laughs.
Right, yeah.
But when he arrives, Abraham knows it's God. And he goes and he gets the fattened calf, the goat, and he brings it to him and gives it to him. And the Lord says, you have done good, right? What's interesting about that passage is this is a story. This is right after Ishmael. Abraham and Sarah are paralleled to Adam and Eve a lot in the stories. And what I love about this story is, so Abraham has already let Sarah control him, like the curse with Ishmael, to send Ishmael away. So they've already resembled the curse. Then in this story, you get Abraham goes to the goat, and it's the same phrasing as the fall of Eve, where he sees the goat, that it is good for eating. He takes it, but instead of eating it, he gives it to God. And God says, you have done well. And there's this parallel between them, and it's just a beautiful case of God is working that out. And it's
he come in the heat of the day?
The heat of the day, which is referencing to the cool of the day. You've also
interesting.
Yeah. And you've got the the narrative of he's like, I'm giving you a son. The promise to destroy the serpent was through a son. And so it's these parallels, they're just beautiful. And the Bible Project does a great job at expressing how beautiful that story is. That kind of just gets, people are just like, oh, he's reinitiating the prophecy. Sarah laughs. And then they're just like, and then they just move on. And it's just like, no, like that's
a big deal there.
The wording is so deep there. Yeah.
Do we want to finally go over Binding of Isaac really quick? Just because I think it ties into Isaac.
If you guys, you know what, let's do it.
Let's
go through.
It's probably the
Binding
most
of Isaac.
important one.
Okay.
The most important?
It capstones Abraham's faith, doesn't it? Like you have the covenant, but the Binding of Isaac shows the faithfulness of Abraham and that he believed that, well...
I don't know if it's the most important. It's definitely up there.
Sure.
I don't know if it's the most important. We might want to fight over that after the
let's
podcast.
Let's fight. The fact that he was about to sacrifice the son who was promised to him by God. A lot of people point to, hey, he's presenting himself as a God of sacrifice now, and Abraham's willing to do it, kind of thing. But the scapegoat, predicts. No, it
foreshadows.
Foreshadowed. That's the right word. Jesus eventually.
Yeah. But, the substitutionary sacrifice.
Yeah, substitutionary of Israel and their law.
Yeah. Well, and you see that theme a lot of the foreshadowing of the tithing, the foreshadowing of the king priest, the foreshadowing of the faithfulness of God, the foreshadowing of Christ, the foreshadowing of the nation, the foreshadowing.
I also think it's interesting how Hebrews 11 puts it, that he believed in that God would raise him from the dead and bring him back because he trusted in God to do that, which is interesting.
Well, and Isaac is said to be the promised child.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So he knows if God's going to fulfill his promises, which he said he will, if I sacrifice Isaac, something's got to happen.
Well, and those previous stories show that where he has failed to believe in God for those promises.
Exactly.
God's like, no, I'm faithful. No, I'm faithful. It leads up to this point where he's about to drive a knife into his son.
With the ultimate challenge, and he is faithful this time.
Yeah.
And arguably there's an element of he's learning that the God he serves is not good with human sacrifice.
He's not good with human sacrifice. But not only that, there's
a lot going on.
We like the nice, clean picture of God. But God is complex. He deals with the darkness of humanity, stuff like that.
Foreshadowing with Isaac going into the next episode, and then
should we kind of explain the story? So God wakes up, God tells Abraham to go sacrifice Isaac. He goes with his servant up to the mountain, and when they get to the mountain, they have wood, and he tells the servant to go back. And him and the child, Isaac, walk up the hill, and Isaac says, "Where's the sacrifice?" And he says, "Don't worry, God will provide the sacrifice. He has already provided the sacrifice." They go up to the top of the mountain. He binds him they build the altar, binds him to the table. He's about to put the knife into him. God says, "Stop." The angel comes, "Stop."
Am I right in saying that it's described that he holds his hand? Not like holding hands, he stays his hand, he keeps him from striking.
It's not know if that's a metaphor for what's going on or whether that's a physical thing. It probably is more like his voice stopped his hand. Right.
Yeah.
And just foreshadowing into Isaac's thing, and then we're going to wrap it up with Joel's going to wrap it up for us. And next week we're going to talk about it. Isaac only says the one line, and then the text presents that he's silent throughout it all.
Yep. Isaac is faithful.
Yeah. And that's something that Isaiah picks up on. And who else goes silently like a lamb to be slaughtered in a sacrifice? Jesus.
Wow.
Anyway, Joel, wrap it up.
Archetype. Yeah. Thanks for listening this far into the Second Rate Saints podcast. We've enjoyed having you guys and hope that you can leave a comment wherever you can find our social media. You can go right to secondраtesaints.com. You can find a link to everything that we're trying to do and everything we're putting out, hopefully weekly. That's kind of where we've been lately, and honestly, we've got some great response. So thank you guys for that. Appreciate our audience, and you have a good week. Bye-bye. I hate Calgary.